The disappearance of Caleb, an avid hiker in the vast mountain range, had remained a mystery for years, leaving his family and the local community in a state of unresolved grief. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. It was during a routine trail maintenance that Marvin, a volunteer, stumbled upon a set of weathered hiking gear, unmistakably Caleb's, lodged between rocks far off the beaten path. As Marvin pieced together the clues from the found items, a chilling realization dawned on him about Caleb's possible fate. They had searched for Caleb for years, but no one had ever found anything, which was strange, as this gear wasn't even that far away from the path. Marvin crouched down and picked some of the pieces up, revealing a name tag clearly stating it belonged to Caleb. The name tag was almost unreadable, but there was a clear C and L, enough to let Marvin believe this gear was valuable evidence. He quickly called 911, and within an hour, the place was swarming with police officers. They took Marvin to the police station for his statement, and he told them everything from beginning to end. He was hiking up the mountain for a routine trail maintenance check when he saw a bird picking at something blue on the edge of a cliff. Wanting to keep the trail clean, Melvin had walked up to the cliff to pick up whatever trash the bird was picking at, but it was no trash. "I called the police as soon as I realized who the gear belonged to," Melvin said, and the police officer seemed to believe him. As he let Melvin go, he handed him a card. "Call me if anything new pops into your mind," the officer said, and the two of them parted ways. On his way to his car, Melvin looked at the card. "Officer Preston," he said quietly to himself. He recognized that last name from somewhere but couldn't remember where exactly. As he walked up to the parking area, he realized that his car was still at the base of the mountain. He sighed as he walked to the bus stop instead and rode the bus back to the mountain, or at least close to it. When he finally arrived at the mountain again, he saw that there were still many police officers, now together with their canine dogs. The search for Caleb had sprung back to life after the finding of new evidence, and Melvin couldn't help but feel invested in it, having found the hiking gear himself. Once home, Melvin immediately Googled Caleb's disappearance. He got a strange feeling when the first news article popped up, and he suddenly realized where he recognized the last name, Preston. From "Hiker disappears without a trace. Have you seen Caleb Preston?" the front page of an article read. "Their family," Melvin muttered in disbelief. But Officer Preston hadn't seemed very happy or excited about Melvin's statement when they spoke. He discovered that Officer Preston was actually William Preston, and that he had become an officer 1 year after Caleb went missing. Since Caleb went missing 2 years ago, that meant Officer Preston had only been an officer for a year. He went to bed that night thinking about Caleb and what the new evidence would mean for the investigation, but he would soon find that out. The next morning, Melvin headed back to the mountain. This time, he would be hiking a different trail, but it would still be up the same mountain. After hiking the trail all the way to the top and stating that there was no maintenance needed, Melvin felt adventurous. It didn't take him long to find boot prints in the mud, but he figured they were probably from one of the police officers. Still, he decided to follow the boot prints just to see where they would take him. As the sun climbed higher, Melvin veered towards the parts of the mountain most hikers never visited. Melvin's boots crunched softly on the underbrush as he reminded himself that if questioned, he'd simply say he got lost during trail maintenance. As he pushed forward, Melvin couldn't help but feel that every painful scratch was a rite of passage, drawing him closer to whatever lay hidden in this dense, unwelcoming scrub. This deep into the wilderness, yet he pressed onward, driven by a mix of fear and resolve. Melvin decided he wasn't equipped for an overnight stay and turned to retrace his steps. Despite his best efforts to navigate, Melvin faced the hard truth: he was lost. Every tree and bush looked like a clone of the last, and panic crept in as the forest seemed to shift around him. Melvin pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up to show just one bar of service, a glimmer of hope. He dialed a 911, the phone ringing emptily against the chorus of the forest. But the call dropped, and no amount of retrying could punch his voice through the thick canopy. Isolated and frustrated, he pocketed his phone, his mind racing for other options. Remembering the giant rock he'd heard about, rumored to be nearby, Melvin forced himself to focus. He moved with a new purpose, eyes scanning for the landmark that he hoped would give him a better chance of finding a way out or being found. After a taxing search, Melvin found the rock, its size more imposing than he'd imagined. Climbing its rough surface took effort, but he managed, pulling himself onto the flat top. It was here he noticed signs of previous visitation, scratches and wear not caused by nature alone. Atop the rock, Melvin discovered carvings that sent shivers down his spine. The scratched sentences read, "Why isn't he picking up? Will they find me? Will I get out?" Each word, etched with desperation, echoed through Melvin's mind. The possibility that Caleb himself had left these messages added an intense, personal connection to the cold stone beneath him. With newfound urgency, Melvin pulled out the card Officer Preston had given him and dialed the number. But the phone only returned to the home screen after several rings, no answer. Melvin's frustration grew as he stared at the screen, willing it to ring through to someone, anyone. Now, with 2 bars showing on his phone, Melvin felt confident enough to try the call again, this time to anyone who might pick up. He dialed numbers from his contacts, each attempt met with the same result: silence. Resolved to his circumstances, Melvin decided to leave his own mark on the rock alongside Caleb's assumed messages. He carved Melvin Caleb. As darkness settled around him and the temperature dropped, he huddled close to the rock. Its cold, hard surface a meager shield against the night's chill. The first light of dawn was a relief to Melvin as he awoke to the warmth of the sun on his face. It wasn't long before another sound intruded on the quiet morning: the distant throb of helicopter blades. He was walking the same mysterious path Caleb had taken, experiencing the same isolation and desperation. Melvin carefully slid down from the rock and started circling it, eye-scarl behambit, scoring the ground for any sign, any clue that might indicate which direction Caleb had gone from there. And Melvin pushed forward, imagining he was tracing Caleb's exact footsteps. He thought about what Caleb might have done, where he might have walked. This imaginary guidance helped Melvin choose his path, making each decision with the mindset of following Caleb's journey. As Melvin walked deeper into the forest, he suddenly heard voices. Moving quietly toward the sound, he hoped to find someone who could help him. But his steps halted when he caught sight of a police uniform through the trees. The sight of law enforcement should have been comforting, yet here in the wilderness, it felt strangely out of place. He was so far from any usual patrol routes or hiking trails, but the presence of the police here, deep in the forest, added layers of confusion and apprehension to his already anxious mind. Drawing closer with caution, Melvin recognized the voice speaking. It was unmistakably Officer Preston's. And why was Preston here, in such a remote part of the forest? Hiding behind a thick tree, Melvin listened as Officer Preston spoke to a woman dressed in hiking gear. They were discussing Caleb and the ongoing investigation. Just as Melvin leaned in further to hear better, his foot dislodged a branch, snapping it loudly underfoot. The sound shattered the quiet, causing the 2 figures to startle and look in his direction. Panic surged through Melvin, and without thinking, he turned and ran, dashing through the underbrush to escape their immediate sight. As Melvin sprinted through the underbrush, he could hear Officer Preston yelling after him. But curiously, the officer didn't pursue him into the dense forest. And this lack of chase stirred suspicion in Melvin's mind. Why would the officer not follow, especially since they were both deeply involved in something as critical as Caleb's disappearance? Determined to get a better view of the area, Melvin made his way back to the giant rock. He climbed its rugged face to the top, scanning the expanse of the forest below. As he surveyed the forest, Melvin's phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw Officer Preston's name flashing on the caller ID. His stomach dropped with a mix of fear and curiosity. Why would Preston call now, after just having shouted at him in the forest? With a deep breath, he decided, letting the phone ring unanswered. Melvin returned to where he last saw Officer Preston and the woman. Again, scouring the muddy ground, he discovered small boot prints clearly from a female and began to follow them. The trail led to an open field near the river where Melvin spotted something unusual: makeshift children's toys scattered about. From the cover of the tree line, Melvin watched the open field, unwilling to cross into the open and reveal his presence. As he crouched, the woman from before suddenly reappeared. She moved through the field with purpose, gathering the toys into her arms. Melvin watched as she then turned and walked back toward the forest. This sight only deepened the mystery. What was she doing with these toys here, in such a secluded spot? Melvin decided to follow the woman discreetly as she entered the forest again. As Melvin followed the path, he entered an area that seemed like it was out of a fairy tale. The path led to a quaint cottage nestled among the trees. As the woman entered the home, she was greeted by the joyful shouts of 2 young children who burst out the door to play. Gathering his courage, Melvin walked up to the cottage door and knocked. The door swung open, and Melvin gasped in disbelief at the person who greeted him. It was Caleb, looking very different from the photos he had seen, but unmistakably the same man who had vanished years ago. Melvin quickly sensed Caleb's confusion and began to explain his presence. He introduced himself and detailed his journey, how he had found Caleb's old hiking gear, followed the clues, and ended up here. As he spoke, Melvin watched Caleb's expressions shift from surprise to cautious interest, each word bridging the gap between the mysterious disappearance and this unexpected encounter. After Melvin finished his story, it was Caleb's turn to share. He explained that his disappearance wasn't an accident. He hadn't just gone missing, he had chosen to disappear. Caleb revealed that he had deliberately left his hiking gear near the cliff edge, crafting a scene that suggested a tragic accident. His hope was that people would assume he had jumped, leaving him free to vanish into his new life without pursuit. Caleb wanted nothing more than a quiet, undisturbed life deep in the forest with his wife. His brother, Officer Preston, had been the only family member to support his drastic decision. This backing was crucial, giving Caleb the freedom to live hidden away from a world he no longer wished to be part of. But the forest had become his refuge, a sanctuary built out of sight. Officer Preston had played a key role in keeping Caleb's secret, up until Melvin stumbled upon the new evidence. Everything had gone according to plan. Preston's efforts had been instrumental in preserving the peace Caleb had so desperately sought. Finally, Caleb looked Melvin in the eyes and asked if he would keep his location a secret. The weight of Caleb's request hung in the air between them. Melvin understood the importance of this secret the peace had afforded Caleb and his family. Without hesitation, he promised to tell no one, sealing the bond of trust that had formed from his extraordinary journey into the unknown.